Jim, our next question, one that several people have sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com. This one is from Marty. It's his first time sending in a question. I don't know where to start with this one.
Well, that's not a good place to start for your first one.
QT Marshall recently gave an interview where he said that AEW booking and creative is done through text messages and group chats, and that there's ideas coming from 100 different directions, which explains why the show feels like it's being booked
in 100 different directions.
That's not all. QT then goes on to say that Booker of the Year keeps most people in the dark on what's going on. And I have a quote here, and let me read you this so we can actually, before you answer it, get the actual quote. This apparently was transcribed by Fightful.com. This is from this QT Marshall interview. Everything is done through text and different group chats and ideas coming from 100 different directions. At the beginning of the week, I get with Tony because I'm the one, with Tony's oversight, I format the show.
Oh boy.
Sometimes I just put Wrestler A second because I don't know the full creative. When we go to our production meeting, 9 out of 10 times, Tony will explain what it is. Sometimes, the way he explains it, it's not fully understood because he may not want to give so much away.
What the fuck?
To the other people on the booking committee. Hold on, let me finish this. Right now, we do everything on the phone because of the pandemic. We do conference calls, and it's much easier this way. The next day at TV, production may pull me aside and are like, what is this? Sometimes I know, sometimes I don't. If I don't know, I send appropriate messages and we figure it out.
Wait a minute, they're in the building now, right? They're still sending messages to each other when they're in the same fucking building?
Appropriate messages, not just messages, and we figure it out. Guys know that if I'm texting, it's for a specific reason. And 10 out of 10 times, it's to help them. When I first saw Cody formatting a pay-per-view, I was like, this is fun. I want to do this. Not realizing that every week for TV with commercial breaks and everything, I guess just not realizing all the work that goes into it. It is fun, and Tony oversees it. I'm not perfect, and there are times I'll oversee something and have this segment next to this segment, and it's the same thing. I don't know the creative, and had I known, I wouldn't have put two brawls next to each other. Things are going to happen, and we are all learning. For someone who has never done it, I think I'm doing all right. A lot of it is common sense and asking questions. So, Jim, your overall thoughts on QT Marshall's quote and what we have now learned from this about how the show is formatted, apparently by QT.
Well, and I like QT Marshall. He was in Delirious found him in, 2011? We brought him to Ring of Honor for a while. That's why I mentioned all the fucking fans had shit fits because he didn't do flips, and now he's doing flips, and he's their favorite guy. But I like QT, but here's the problem. I have a question I want to ask. Why? Why to any of that? That's insane. And the problem is, yes, they're figuring it out. They're learning as they go along. They're learning how to do it the way they're figuring out how to do it. Do you want your fucking heart surgeon to just root around in your chest for a while and figure it out on his own? Or do you want maybe somebody that's done several thousand heart operations explain to him exactly the way it's supposed to be done from the start, so that practice period where he's figuring it out doesn't end in a lot of fatalities? I can just speak for myself for the process, but every great booker that I have ever worked for or with, and Vince is the exception on this. Well, we've said he's not a great booker, he's a great promoter, but you got your TV when you get to the fucking building, and then you tell people what to do. You don't take ideas from 100 different sources. You don't fucking have somebody else doing your format. With Dusty, Yeah, he'd scribble some shit down and hand it to JJ, and JJ would copy it out in legible fucking, but he was still just recopying so everybody else could read it. I don't understand this, and only telling people what they need to know. Well, if you hired a bunch of fucking professional wrestlers instead of a bunch of professional goddamn Twitterers, maybe they'd, and if you taught them how to kayfabe, maybe they could keep their fucking mouth shut. He's afraid the fucking boys are going to tell everybody what's going on, so he doesn't tell the boys what they're doing? First off, if I'm writing a weekly television show, which I have a total of 600 episodes of 2 different weekly television programs, I take last week's format and a tape of last week's show. And then I go through and, okay, what do I want to remind people of? Do I want to play the finish from that match? Do I want to play a fucking package from that match? Do I want to have a clip of that promo? I get all my VTRs from last week's program that I want to play back this week to reinforce the point that was made or lead to whatever the fuck, or make sure that it's in everybody's mind. And hopefully in an hour program, I would come up with no more than about 8 minutes of VTRs, because then after that, it starts getting hard to put them in when you got your live content also. Then I have my list of commercial spots, because I'm going to work those into the breaks, and I want to make sure that I don't forget anything. Now that I got my list of VTRs and of commercial spots, then I know what my TV main event is in my head. I better. And also any other matches that I want to specifically have. And I write those down over in does somebody need to be heard from in a live interview, which is probably going to follow a VTR from what happened last week. As soon as you see that, you come out in the ring. There's the live interview with one of the participants to further that. So I put my live content in another fucking list. Then I look at my talent roster and I see who's represented and who's not represented. Well, my top guys, I want them probably to be live and in VTR, and I want to make sure I see them work or talk, maybe both. As it goes down the list, some of the guys I may just want to see work. Some I may just want to hear talk in a 30-second pre-tape just to make sure their face is on. And the last guys down at the bottom, I'm going to fill them in some job guy positions because they're there to get their ass kicked. Now I've got my live content. I've got my VTRs, I've got my commercial spots. Now I've got to put it together so that it flows from start to finish. And we don't have 2 segments where there's long live interviews back to back, but we also don't go 4 segments in a row with all wrestling, because then we've fucking not got a nice little fucking up and down going. And then whether you're doing 7 segments and 6 breaks or 6 segments and 5 breaks, for the format for the 1-hour show you're doing, I did 7 and 6 back in Smoky Mountain Wrestling when matches, people didn't expect the TV matches to be so long. In OVW, I did 6 and 5 because we had a little bit more time not to interrupt most matches with commercial breaks. But still and yet, it was challenging sometimes to get everything wormed in. Once you've got everything on your format the way you want it, then you got to go back and time everything. And then you know what the times are on your VTRs, you know what the times are on your commercial spots, and you also know approximately how long it's going to take these guys to do their entrance and get in the ring. So then you're down to your match time. Well, if your fucking match time isn't good enough, if you've only got 4 minutes for your fucking main event, and you've trimmed everything else you can trim, then you got to start cannibalizing your VTRs and see if you can fucking make it shorter or do it a different way. And finally, when you've got the whole thing timed out, then you type the whole goddamn thing up. Then you make a list of all the VTRs for the person that's doing the editing. Then you make a list of all the pre-taped interviews that you're going to do and put in the show so that when you produce those, you make sure you don't forget anything. Then you do notes on each segment by segment for the announcers. It helped me in OVW because I was one of the announcers too, so I didn't have to go into so much detail. but you do notes for the announcers based on what the people in that match have done or are trying to do, or who they're involved with, or what matches of theirs you might promote at upcoming events during the course of the commentary on the match. So you got your announcer's notes done. There's a few other pieces of paperwork for other people that might need to know things that I am leaving off. And then when you get to the goddamn taping, you first sit down with whoever's directing and whoever's the camera people are and all of your referees, and you go over the exact show step by step, including the way the finishes are going to be for the camera people and the referees so that they've got it and so that they're going to be able to shoot it. And so your director is going to be able to have the right camera up. And then you have your referees go and bring the talent segment by segment into the finish room that you've set up, where you then get everybody involved in seg one and you tell them exactly what's going on and you get their input. And do you want to say something different, or you want to add to this finish, or whatever the fuck, blah, blah, blah. And then that's worked out good. Next referee, bring me seg two. And you go all the way through the show that way. And then you break everybody loose for fucking pre-taped interviews where you sit there and you remind them what they're supposed to be saying and the time frame between, yes, this has already happened, but you can't talk about this yet because that hasn't happened in the program. And then you produce those, and then you sit down with the announcers right before you go on the air and remind them of everything again. And then you ring the bell and do the show. It's fucking easy. I don't recall having 100 conversations with 100 different people. I don't recall having somebody else do my format, which is insane. That's like, I'm going to write a book. Here, you write 4 chapters. What? And as far as telling the guys, you tell them exactly what they're doing in that instance on that show, what their frame of mind would be, or as Howard Finkel used to say, what their demeanor is. Are they mad? Are they sad? Are they happy? Are they rambunctious? And you explain to them if there's a specific spot in the finish or a specific thing that you need them to say in a verbiage in a certain way. You explain to them how that ties into the ongoing angle, program, etc. And without telling them every move to make for the next month or 6 weeks or 8 weeks or whatever, you tell them the general direction that the thing is going and or what kind of match it's going to end up in. And or if you're going to do special stipulations, you know, you'll say, okay, we're going to do this match. And then in the match, such and such happens. It leads to a rematch and the stipulation will be such and such because of that finish. That's where we're headed. You don't give them 6 months of fucking detail, but you don't leave them in the dark because you're afraid that everybody's going to find out. Because if you've hired a bunch of fucking loose-lipped marks to be in your locker room, yeah, everybody's going to find out. But if you got professional wrestlers, they need to know what the fuck they're doing. It's like Dutch Mantell used to have a perfect analogy in that the booker is the coach of the football team. And he comes up with the plays, but he doesn't run them. The players run them. And if it's good play and a bad player, that means you need to change the players to run the good play. But if you got good players, but they're not getting over, that's because you're giving them bad plays to run. But that's the reason you get wrestlers, is to give them the plays and let them run them. Because everybody runs their play in a different fucking fashion. So I've never heard of a bunch of fucking cloak and dagger back and forth bullshit wherever that's, you know, the fucking shows like the old whore the night before the prom and everybody's got their finger in her. It's fucking ridiculous.
It's a bad job, too. Can you imagine being the person having to put all those notes together from Cody, Omega, the Bucks, and Jericho,
I thought
and bring it to Tony Khan and
having to be the person to put the finger in her.
Well,
But no, but that's notes. Fuck notes. That's the thing. You sit down with where you want to go and the match you've got, and then let the boys figure out how they would most like to get to where you want them to go. It's a fucking collaboration, but it's not a goddamn, hey, everybody pitch in your ideas on how we're going to write this show. That's obviously that's why it looks like it does. And once again, the process that I just delineated is the way that I wrote every television show, every primetime special that we did in OVW, the format for every pay-per-view that I formatted in WCW or the WWF. Not saying that in the WWF I came up with everything that existed in those shows, but I did the paperwork on the formats for most of them. And no, just no. That's the biggest clusterfuck I've ever heard, is what was just described. And then that's another thing. If anybody ever wonders why I was always so fucking grumpy at TV, it's because I hadn't had any sleep for the previous 36 to 48 hours. And knew that the sooner we got finished with this shit and everybody did their shit right, the easier it was going to be for me to get the fuck out of there when it was over with. Because do that fucking years at a time with no weeks off and see what the fuck attitude you come up with.